Hey there, Rappies. Rapper9198 here, and welcome to another edition of Ryan's Day Reading. Today I'll be reading Chapter 11 of Make a Move, titled Vocational Experiments. So from the previous chapter, it was about purpose and mission experiments. More experiments that more related to moving toward like what your purpose or what your calling is. And there were some examples in that chapter there. Yeah, I won't go too much into it, but yeah, the last chapter was on purpose and mission experiments. So now we go to chapter 11 on vocational experiments. Experiments about work and how to make a living while still having a life. Yep. Here we go. So you're sure I've never met her before? I asked my mom on the phone, calling from my dorm room. My mom had sent a package to me at college that included some mail that had been delivered at home. And inside was a postcard from a woman I had never met. She was on my mom's Christmas card list, and each Christmas, my mom had written a little paragraph about what I was up to. As far as we knew, all she knew about me came from the few sentences in those Christmas cards. She wrote, "Steph, will you consider becoming a pastor? You certainly display the gifts we look for to challenge someone to go to seminary. With love, Mary Ann." On the back was a photo of Mary Ann wearing a clerical collar. So it seemed she was a pastor herself. As a 21-year-old with very little experience beyond my own faith tradition, this photo seemed unusual on so many levels. First of all, I had rarely seen a pastor with a clerical collar. Also, I could count on one hand how many women pastors I had met. That day, I began taking steps toward what I felt then and still feel today is my calling, to be a pastor. Now I realize I was young. Very few people know what they are called to do at the age of 21. For that, I truly am thankful. But before you get the idea that all it took was a postcard to know what I was supposed to do with my life, let me give you a little more context. I had 6 other pastors ask me a question similar to Mary Ann's. The first time was when I was only 15. For the next 6 years, I thought about pretty much every other option available to me as a future vocation. It wasn't that I was running from the idea or that I was even all that reluctant. It's just that vocational questions are so difficult for most of us, and I wasn't an exception. Also, my lack of experience caused me to assume that these folks must be mistaken. Generally, people of my gender, personality type, and passion areas weren't pastors in churches. When I look with broad strokes at my colleagues today, I might still be considered a bit of an outlier, but that doesn't automatically mean this vocation isn't right for me. It just created multiple hurdles that others didn't have to jump over to figure out the best profession. Back to the steeplechase analogy again. It may seem like 7 people bringing up the same vocation would make it obvious, but until that postcard from Mary Ann, it really didn't feel like it. That postcard helped me connect these conversations as something the Holy Spirit was prompting. With hindsight bias, I can see how God was using this pattern and these people to guide me. But when we are wondering and questioning our vocational options, it can feel like we are deep in the weeds and can't see our way out. Almost 20 years later, I am still primarily living into the vocational calling to be a pastor. But along the way, there have been many other questions. The concept of vocation for most of us is not merely our job, but how we will use all of our time and energy. I tend to think of a vocation as the roles and work that one participates in that contribute to the greater good of society and support their and/or their family's livelihood. My definition of vocation, then, would include caring for children and aging adults, and performing volunteer work or other endeavors in which you don't receive monetary payment. It would also include what sociologist Michaela de Leonardo calls kin work, the work done to hold relational webs of family and community together. This work can be as demanding as a full-time job, or even more demanding for many folks, parenthetically there, and this is typically unpaid. Of course, even today, much of this work is done by women, although not exclusively. Many men have found it meaningful and enjoyable to join in this work, and you can see how families who share this work can experience a deeper partnership. Vocation, in my perspective, also includes learning, both formal and informal education. Many folks have a paid job and are also part-time or even full-time students. Both their job and their studies are part of their vocation. Finally, when someone is looking for work or discerning a change in their vocation, that discernment work itself is also an aspect of their vocation. So for me, as I write this, I see my paid vocation including being a pastor, professor, leadership coach, and author. However, I also add to my vocation the work I do producing podcasts. Even though this is not a paid endeavor, I see it as contributing to the greater good. Time that I volunteer in my neighborhood and for those in need in my city and community is also part of my vocation. Finally, being a good wife, sister, daughter, aunt, and friend are all critical aspects of my vocation. I give a lot of my time as well as emotional and mental energy to keeping my family and communities connected relationally. While we will talk specifically about relational experiments in the next chapter, I have found it helpful to see this work as a part of a vocation rather than compartmentalizing kin work as something else. Thinking about vocation through this big picture approach is helpful as we talk about designing experiments for vocational decisions. It can be a trap to think about your vocation as merely what you get paid to do. Experiments that transcend merely what we see as our paid profession will lead to deeper purpose and meaning in the work we do in our lives. When we integrate the concept of vocation, it can help us recognize the mental load that comes from not only the work we get paid to do, but the kin work many do daily, as well as the discernment work we do when a career change may be up ahead. It can empower us to see learning and education as critical parts of vocation, even though we rarely get paid to learn and often are the ones paying to get the education. Right, and then this next part here is logistics. What does that even mean? My brother Rob had just moved back to Minnesota with his wife of 3 years. They were in their mid-20s, and both were knee-deep into their first professional roles. My brother had a disappointing experience working for a nonprofit, sitting at a desk, sending emails, and making phone calls all day long. He was withering on the vine. When he moved back, he found out that his alma mater offered free career assessments for their alums. And then in parentheses here, tip. This could be a great part of the listening process for anyone considering a vocational experiment. See if you have access to a skills test or assessment for free, or a small fee with a career counselor. So that part's in parentheses there. When Rob got his results, he was confused at first. Logistics came up as one of his top career field options. Initially, he had no idea what that meant, but he soon realized that these were the folks who did things like help the soap or cereal companies get their products to the various big box stores. Feeling a crunch for time, he hopped on LinkedIn and found another alum from our college who had this listed as their field. He was connected from one person to the next, from one informational interview to another. He felt as though he was a hot potato being passed around. This is often how networking feels in the middle of it. Finally, he landed an entry-level job at a logistics firm that helped sort out the details for products to move to Minnesota-based companies like Target and General Mills. I came to visit him on site at the General Mills campus, ate at their fancy cafeteria, and listened to him talk about his job. He had an energy I hadn't seen in a while, as he was finally using his brain as it was wired, and that was clearly life-giving to him. But as he talked, I could tell something was missing. When he was a teenager, I remember him saying, "I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I know I want to help people." Something in me felt like helping the right amount of Cheerios get to the right target was not the kind of helping that he felt created to do. When my church had an opportunity to help with a problem at our local school, we realized quickly it needed some logistical experience. So of course, Rob jumped in, ready to help. Seeing his vocation as more than what he got paid to do permitted him to pour his free time into this project. You see, the school where we worship had shared with us a growing problem as they were facing with their students. Since there was such a high rate of poverty among the kids' families, the kids were stealing food or taking it out of the trash on Fridays because they were facing food insecurity at home on the weekends. It was such a heartbreaking reality that we knew we needed to help. Rob had the skills to make it possible for our little community to make a big impact. With his help, we were able to offer a bag of food for every kid in our school whose family requested one by discreetly placing it in their backpack on Friday before they went home for the weekend. By the end of the year, that was almost 300 kids. All right, then this next part is to job search or not to job search. Yep. It didn't take a change of career for Rob to do what he felt wired to do with his paid vocation, and also with the gift of his time to the community. If you feel like your mind and heart are engaged in the work you get paid to do, that is a gift. Job satisfaction is not very high overall. I've heard job coaches suggest that only 20% of people like 80% of their job, and thus As 80% of people dislike much or most of their job. When it comes to vocational experiments, many of you might consider whether you need to change your paid vocation or if you can be fulfilled by giving some of your free time to projects or roles that allow you to contribute to the greater good without making a career change. For others, your experiments may lead you to a very significant change. Either way, I offer you this challenge. Before you start the process or the experiments to switch careers, examine what you are doing currently. Whether you are in middle management at a company or slinging lattes at a coffee shop, look for ways your current job can contribute to human flourishing. We are created with the ability to bear the image of God in all sorts of work. It's a real shame that some people of faith have created a hierarchy when it comes to God's work. Maybe you have heard these types of assumptions. Those called to ministry or missions are clearly the most honored by God. Next, we have helping professions and education. Somewhere in there, we can put other helpful services like transportation, communication, and even some other roles like electricians and plumbers. But at the bottom of the righteous calling hierarchy, we have business people, salespeople, and other seemingly profit-driven endeavors. But don't worry, you can redeem the lack of holiness in your career by giving a good portion of your hard-earned money away. People in roles like mine may then also add, in quotes here, the most important part of your job is sharing your faith with your coworkers and inviting them to church. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, then I am glad. But the cultures I have been in most of my life have created a deeply embarrassing and disappointing false hierarchy. You can bear the image of God in any career. When you follow God into a vocation that is good for you, that calling is just as important as any other, including vocational ministry. I'm so sorry if you have felt belittled or minimized in your role, or if you have been made to feel like your best contribution is the financial support of churches and nonprofits. Also, it is wonderful to consider how your coworkers are your work neighbors and how you might love them as yourself, as Jesus commanded us to do. It's great if you have opportunities to share your faith with them, but your witness, as we sometimes call it, will be much stronger if you also do your job well and commit yourself to being the best version of yourself while fulfilling your job description. In addition to loving your work neighbors and making money that you can be generous with, there are 3 other ways your work matters to God. So first, God can use your vocation, paid or otherwise, to form you spiritually. Don't buy into the illusion that a church program or some sort of faith-based book group is the only way to grow in faith. You spend most of your waking hours at work or living into your broader vocation. Try asking Jesus to show you how your work can form you to be more like Him on a daily basis. Second, God can use you in your workplace to be a person of integrity. Many times, we wonder if a decision our company or organization is making is ethical, moral, or truly about the flourishing of all people. We have the opportunity to advocate for equity, honesty, and social concern in our workplaces. This can be difficult, but God gives us wisdom and courage. And this work is not only needed for nonprofit companies. Nonprofits with missions of justice, as well as churches and Christian organizations, are just as capable of making mistakes that are harmful and unethical and contribute to the tearing down of individuals and groups of people. Ask God's Spirit to show you how you can use your voice and your role to speak for those who are not being heard, or to shed light on an area that doesn't serve the greater good of humanity, or your organization for that matter. And finally, third, we all have an opportunity to see the way that we can bear God's image through our work. We believe in the core theological concept that stems from Genesis 1, that humans were made in the image of God. Thus, the way we live our lives, including our work, resembles who God is and what God does. Think about the job or jobs you have right now. No matter what it is, you have the opportunity to bear God's image. Whenever I talk about this, people bring up work that is illegal or immoral in their minds. Sure, there are limits, but my point is, most of the time, we tend to shrink the roles that resemble and bear the image of God to just a short list. For instance, in the false career hierarchy I described earlier, the service industry is usually placed in the middle at best, or at the bottom at worst. But during the global pandemic, we came to realize just how much human flourishing relies on the many facets of the service industry. This industry holds together the relational as well as economic threads of society. We are not a great version of ourselves when we were without these important workers. The way those in the service industry provide for others and create space for hospitality resembles God's provision and deep welcome to humanity through creation. Take a look at this list that describes the value of work and think about the job you have right now, or maybe your last few jobs. Every one of these activities bears the image of God. My challenge to you is to find a job that doesn't have at least one of these qualities. I doubt you will find one. So these are the list right here is creates organization from chaos, sustain or produce resources that help people thrive, organize spaces necessary or helpful for people to thrive, infuse hope in the midst of struggle or suffering, bring life, care for life or sustain life, care for the natural world and its resources, bring beauty or creativity, tell or share stories, help people learn and receive resources for thriving, help people understand their purpose or story, help people overcome barriers to living their best lives, support, coach, or develop people or coworkers, offer food or nourishment to support human flourishing, foster relationships and communication between people, and help people rest or create spaces for recreation. So here's the whole list right here. So any job that has at least one of those qualities. Yeah. Before you start experimenting for a change, take some time to evaluate your work through this framework. I have noticed that those who can't find any inherent value in a career or role they don't love continue to struggle even after making a switch. All right, now this next part is, how did you get here? Those of you considering an experiment to make a change or decision about your vocation have gotten to this point in any number of ways. Some of you may be in the early stages of discovering what your first career may be. This is a great time to experiment. In his early 20s, my husband realized he was interested in 3 different careers. He did 3 6 to 9 month experiments. The third one led him to filmmaking and videography, and that has been his career ever since. He loves it. Some of you are thinking about experimenting vocationally because you have recently lost your job. This can be so difficult and often unexpected. Many times, grief is an important precursor to an experiment. It can actually be an important part of the process of moving forward. Some of you are wondering about vocation because you have a sense of unsettledness, or you are starting to realize that you lack fulfillment in your job or career. Remember to think about the big picture of vocation so you don't make a job switch that doesn't offer much more fulfillment. However, when you have a feeling of uneasiness about your vocation that you just can't shake, experimenting is a great way to take steps without jumping into the deep end and potentially making too big of a change too fast. Change is always risky, but when it comes to the work that provides our income, especially if we have a partner or others we help provide for, the risk goes beyond just ourselves. One note about the lack of fulfillment many of us feel, even when we find a career or vocation we love. We are humans living in a world that has many wonderful attributes, but is not as it should be. It's wonderful to appreciate your big picture vocation as a worker, friend, parent, volunteer, and so on. We can experience so much joy from these roles and activities, but we all experience disappointment and often pain in these areas as well. No job, combination of jobs, or vocation is perfect because we don't live in a perfect world. Our future hope is that Jesus will return to restore the world to all its potential and more. So if you find yourself with a consistent sense of longing, I think it's normal to long for that future. Longing is what hope looks like on a hard day. The quest to satiate that longing in this life can become exhausting, like chasing down something that can never be caught. However, there is something more than what we experience now. This future hope is important to keep in mind, as job searches and constant transition can often run us ragged. All right, and then this next part is when a big change is coming. What my brother Rob didn't realize was that this new volunteer role, helping to feed kids in the public schools where our church met, was only the beginning. This was such a meaningful and exciting process that he began to wonder if there was something more for him in this. Rob reached out to a couple of other churches and asked if he could help them do the same thing at the schools they were partnering with. They were eager to join in because the local schools they partnered with had students who were facing the same food insecurity struggle. A Bible study group at our church was reading Numbers 13 and 14 about the spies who went to scope out the land. Numbers 13 through 14, about the spies who went to scope out the land God had promised to God's people. If you know the story, you know that the people there were big and powerful. So God's people were full of fear. That scripture reading flipped a switch in Rob's mind and heart, and he began to pursue what it would look like to take a risk and launch a nonprofit that could provide logistics so that no kid in Minnesota schools would go hungry over the weekend. He felt like giants were in the way, just like in the Bible story, but he felt compelled to try anyway. He raised some money and then resigned from his logistics company to this venture. His boss was proud of him, but offered to let him work part-time at first, even though that was unusual at the company. Within 10 months, Rob's new nonprofit was scaling to the point that he had to work at it full-time, and a few months later, add some part-time staff. The nonprofit is named Every Meal, because every child should have access to every meal and never wonder where their next meal will come from. Every Meal now has over 250 community groups and churches, sponsoring over 270 schools in Minnesota. They led one of the largest efforts to provide food to kids and families in Minneapolis during the COVID-19 pandemic as well as after the uprising resulting from the murder of George Floyd. They have provided over 6 million meals to families in Minnesota. But it all started with an experiment. Rob's question led from one experiment to the next. What if I took a skills inventory? What if I put time and effort into networking? What if I can use logistics outside of my paid position to make a difference? What if we tried to help more schools? What if I raised money and tried to scale this effort even further? Question, experiment, question, experiment. It all resulted in millions of meals for kids in need. Now, what is your what if that can get you started experimenting in your vocational next steps? All right, and now we've got a few case studies. So here's the first case study. Lindsay and Raul had been married for 6 years and had a 9-month-old and a 4-year-old. Lindsay took time off for both kids when they were born before heading back to her job as a first-grade teacher. She loved teaching, but each transition back from maternity leave triggered a nagging feeling in her heart. She didn't want to be a stay-at-home parent, even though there would be some great aspects to that. Besides, they couldn't afford it. She found herself dreaming about starting a small child care center that could focus on kindergarten and readiness at an affordable rate for families. There were many groups like this, but she realized just how hard it was to find one in her area and secure a spot for her kids. Raul had been looking to transition as well. He was in higher education and needed to move to a different university. The previous year had been a string of disappointments, making it to the final round of job candidates only to come in second over and over again. Together, they were vocationally frustrated and discouraged. They quickly realized they couldn't rely on each other in the same way because they were both in a tailspin. So they decided to invite a mentor of theirs into the conversation. They got a sitter and found some time to talk through the scenario with their mentor. Lindsay had already done some homework on her child care center idea. She had researched the training and the costs if she were to start the center out of their home. She wasn't 100% sure she was supposed to step away from teaching to start this venture. Through the conversation, they realized she was more sure that she wanted to try than either of them had acknowledged. What they had been waiting on was Raul's job. They had both figured the decision about Lindsay's job would come after Raul's job transition. This conversation helped them realize that the question wasn't if Lindsay should launch her childcare center, but when. The question they were really asking was, should we take this risk as a family and support Lindsay's vision to start a childcare center, even though Raul is still in a job search? Their mentor encouraged them to step into a couple of different experiments. First, both of them would reach out to other families to see who, among those they already knew, would be willing to enroll in the child care center. Having committed, paying clients up front would help mitigate the risk. They made a list and a deadline for those conversations. They designed the second experiment, following the 10-10-10 rule, invented by business writer Susie Welch. This rule helps you imagine how you'll feel about your decision at different times in the future. So like 10 minutes, 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 months, 10 years. So kind of that stuff. Like here are the steps they took. So step 1, they found a time to get away, just the two of them. They planned to spend a day relaxing and resting. The next day, they would start their process. Yep, so it's good to just, clear your mind. You got to start with a clear mind and be able to think clearly there. Step 2, they both brought separate journals. Headed to the lake nearby, they sat down to reflect and write. They agreed in advance that Lindsay was more likely to write in her journal bullet by bullet, while Rawl was more of a narrative thinker and would need more time to write. They both agreed they wanted to take this time journaling in a posture of prayer, asking God's Spirit to reveal anything that could help them in their next steps. Step 3, they wrote down 2 statements in the form of decisions they could hypothetically make. First, they would go ahead and start to launch the child care center out of their home in the next 6 months so they could open in September. And second, they would wait to make a move until Rawl found a new job. Step 4, they put both decision statements through the 10-10-10 process, journaling their answers to these questions and trying to imagine what it would be like if this were a final decision. How would I feel? So the questions, how would I feel about this decision 10 minutes from now? How would I feel about this decision 10 months from now? And how would I feel about this decision 10 years from now? And step 5, finally they walked back to their cabin, made dinner, and compared their notes. Of course, this experiment didn't have to result in a decision. However, by the end of the dinner, they decided that they would choose to wait until Rawl got a different job. Through the process, they both realized they were more open to moving to another city if there was a job there that was a good fit for Rawl. As much as they loved their community, they had some good friends in a few other cities, and both of them had sensed God reminding them to pay attention to their relationships in the process. They ended up making a whole other decision that weekend. They would expand Rawl's job search to universities in 2 other cities where they had family and friends. All right, and then that was one case study, and here's the second and final one in this chapter. Yolanda had been living in the Midwest for most of her life. Like many Midwesterners, she daydreamed about living in California and not having to deal with the freezing winters that she had endured for so many years. She never expected this daydream to become an actual option, but a headhunter asked Yolanda to apply for a position at a company just outside San Francisco. She figured there was no harm in going through the interview process. After all, that's how she got her current position. The process went quickly. They even flew her out for a few days. She had a job offer and an invitation to move if she could do so within a couple of months. While the daydreams had been fun, deciding to make this move felt way more significant than she could have imagined. She needed to design an experiment, and fast, because she only had a few weeks before they would need an answer. She asked a few friends she trusted to come over and talk through the decision with her. She shared the opportunity with the others and asked them to try to put their personal relationships with her aside as much as possible. But she also told them she did want her relationships here to be a factor in this decision. She paid attention to her friends' questions and reactions as part of her listening process. Questions and reactions are part of her listening process. One friend asked, "How sure would you need to be in order to say yes to this job? I mean, there is no such thing as 100%, so which percentage are you shooting for realistically in the next 2 weeks?" This question led Yolanda to the experiment she designed. She's a pretty measured and cautious person, so she said she needed to be 80% sure before saying yes to the move. Then she outlined these steps. Step 1, she found a mason jar and ordered 100 marbles online for a few bucks. Each marble represented 1% of her assurance that this was the right decision. Step 2, she counted out 20 of the marbles and set them aside in a drawer. These represented the 20% that would add up to the complete certainty. Putting them in the drawer helped her give up certainty as a reality. Because again, it's no certainty, just assurance. Step 3, after talking to her friends, she felt she was about 55% sure about saying yes to the job. Her friends were more supportive than she had imagined because they could tell that this could be a great opportunity for her. So she placed 55 marbles into the jar. Step 4, she placed a bowl next to the jar and put the 25 additional marbles in the bowl. And step 5, over the next 2 weeks, she had many conversations with friends and family, spent time in prayer, and worked out the numbers, realizing just how much higher the cost of living was in California. After each day, she reflected on the work she had done and either added marbles to the jar or took some out and put them in the bowl. And finally, step 6, she gave herself a deadline of 2 weeks and told a friend she would make the decision that day. After the 2 weeks were over, she realized just how much she was wavering back and forth in this decision. Her parents had a lot of questions she didn't know the answers to, which caused her trepidation, so she removed some marbles. She connected online with some of the folks who would be her new team members, and that went so well that she added back a handful of marbles. When she realized that the cost of living meant she was really only getting a small financial promotion, she took some marbles out. When she negotiated a higher salary and realized she could afford more plane tickets and a slightly larger apartment for visitors, she added some marbles. By decision day, she had 76 marbles in the jar, and she spent time in prayer and journaling that afternoon. During that time, she felt like Jesus invited her to trust him not just with the 20% of uncertainty, but with that additional 4% as well. She called her friend and blurted out, "I'm making the move!" All right, and that's chapter 11. So yeah, those are some good, I think that's really a very common decisions there is in terms of careers and career changes. So that's a very good one that I think a lot of us really have in common there. Alrighty, well that's chapter 11. Thank you, Rappies, again very much. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and hopefully some of that can help you out. So again, I greatly appreciate all of you. Hope you guys are enjoying these reading videos. Hope you guys enjoy listening to them and watching them as much as I do making them and reading these to you. So I love being a vessel, as I like to say, in reading these stories to you to hopefully help spread these messages and helpful tips farther. All right. Well, thank you, Rappies, again very much. Love you all to death. And until next time, I'll see you later, and God bless.